Welcome to today's video lecture. In this video lecture, we'll discuss structuring oral presentations, which brings us to a very obvious question, which is this: how do you do it? How do you structure an effective oral presentation? And for me, the simplest answer to this question is to conceive of an oral presentation as basically just a live version of a written persuasive message. Because of this comparison, I believe that oral presentations should have the same four basic elements that we find in written persuasive messages. As a refresher, these four elements are as follows. So first, you want to begin by identifying the problem or need that your presentation seeks to address. Remember, this should be your audience's problem or need, not your own. Second, you should propose a solution to that problem or need. Third, you should support your solution to that problem or need with evidence and with reason. And then finally, you should close with a call to action, and you should focus on building goodwill, and not just in the ending, ideally throughout your presentation. So that's an overview of what your oral presentation should be doing, but now let's dive into the specific structure of an oral presentation, where it's similar to a written persuasive message and where it differs from a written persuasive message. So let's start out with the opening hook. You want to start out your oral presentation with a hook that grabs your audience's attention. Now, having a hook is something you might opt for in a written persuasive message, but in an oral presentation, it's essential. You've really got to grab your audience and pull them in as quickly and effectively as possible. There are a number of different approaches that you can take to this hook. You can have an effective, compelling title. You can have a little anecdote at the beginning. You can have a memorable statistic. Sky's the limit. Just think of something that grabs your audience's attention, pulls them in, gets them engaged with your presentation right off the bat. Next, you want to identify the problem or need that your presentation seeks to address, just as you would in a written persuasive message. You then want to clearly state the purpose of your presentation. In other words, you want to identify a solution to your audience's problem or need. And then you want to provide basically the oral equivalent of a mapping statement. You want to preview your structure. You want to preview your main supporting points. And that's how you approach the introduction to an oral presentation. Now let's pivot to the body of an oral presentation. In your body, as in a written persuasive message, you should address your topics in the order that you introduce them. You should support your claims with, at very least, logos, but ideally with pathos and ethos as well. And you should use transitions, verbal signposting, and repetition to keep your listener oriented. Structure is important in all communication, but it's even more important in oral presentations because it's so much easier to get disoriented when you're listening rather than reading. Now, let's take a look at how these different elements can fit together in a typical body section. And remember, you'll have as many body sections as you have main points, just as you would in a written persuasive message. So you're going to begin your body section with a transition from the previous point, something like, well, that's enough about the introductory structure of an oral presentation. Now let's talk about body sections. You'll then state your main point. This will align closely with the elements of that oral mapping statement that we talked about earlier. You'll then provide evidence to support that main point, typically 2 to 3 pieces of evidence. If you want to address or mitigate your audience's reservations, you can do so, typically toward the end of that body section. You then want to close your body sections by restating your main point or main takeaway for that section. And then you want to transition to that next point. All right? So that's basically how you do it. That's how you tackle a body section in an oral presentation. And finally, let's talk about how you can conclude your oral presentation. As I mentioned earlier, you want to repeat your main point, your solution to your audience's problem or need in your conclusion. You want to motivate action. You want to tell your audience what they need to do after you finish this presentation. And then finally, you want to end memorably. Just as you want to come in on a strong note, you want to go out on a strong note. And of course, throughout your presentation, you want to focus on building goodwill. You want to say nice things about your audience. You want to demonstrate that you know who they are, what they care about, that you respect them. And you want to make yourself as likable as possible. Those are all very effective ways to develop that goodwill, which is so crucial to effective communication, particularly in a business setting. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of this very brief video lecture on structuring oral presentations. Remember, the key point here, the overall point that I want you to take away from this is that oral presentations are not this mysterious beast. They're really just live versions of written persuasive messages. If you keep that basic principle in mind, you're going to do great. Thanks for watching.